Thank you. Dr. Ben Spencer.
Thank you. So on that point, do you have any sight of the number of people who don't claim UC, but who don't get into work because of childcare costs?
I'm not aware of that data existing.
And you can see why I asked the question, because it's something that comes up quite a lot in terms of child costs being an obstruction to getting people to work. I'm sure you agree with me that we should be doing everything we possibly can to support people into work who have childcare or current needs. And I think one of the things that was really remarkable for me from the witnesses from last week is one of them was paying £300 a month in childcare costs, which completely blows out of the water the £100 a month from temporary UC uplift. So what appraisal has the department done in terms of the main pressures of cost of living on UC claimants? Where would you say the big beasts are, for want of better words, in terms of the challenge, which are challenging people who are in work but still struggling?
Yeah, that's actually a very, very good question. And I say cost of living has been a key focus for me, because I'm conscious that I only really have two levers within this role, and as does the Secretary of State. Well, one is increasing benefits, which comes with huge cost, and the other is getting people into work and progressing in work. And we've got a comprehensive plan for jobs to do that, and actually things are heading in the right direction in that sphere. But I'm conscious it's other government departments that often have responsibility for other areas which directly affect our claimants, so things like energy costs and broadband and utilities. But if you're asking me about the big beasts are without question childcare and housing, and the latter being one of the biggest beasts. And we know that around half of all of those on universal credit top up by a substantial amount their housing costs. And now there are two ways of looking at that, Chair. We could just continually increase the LHA rates, but I mean, unfortunately, as we know, that largely lines the pockets of private rented sector landlords and can have an adverse impact in terms of pushing up rents. Or we have to look very seriously about what we can do around affordable and homes for social rent. And I assure you, those conversations are ongoing with my counterparts at MHCLG.
If I may add a little colour to that, I think there's a few points here. That's one of the reasons that we brought in Flexible Support Fund to support people who are in lighter touch, to help them with their training and support and other needs that can get them out of this scenario. It's something that work coaches felt very strongly about, and childcare can be related to that. And if people can progress and get more skills and more confidence to earn more, then that obviously takes this thing out of a really difficult point. The other thing is, because of the COVID pandemic, not everyone, I've very much recognised, not everyone's been able to work at home, but a lot of people have been able to work flexibly, and actually employers are really starting to recognise, and one of the most useful understandings, particularly for working families, was the impact of having to manage homeschooling and everything around it. So the employers are being much more open-minded and understanding when it comes to childcare, and being more flexible with shifts, and also where we have so many vacancies, people are really trying to look at those shifts and trying to make sure that they're appealing. For example, in the haulage sector, the shortage there, people are looking very much about shifts, trying to appeal to 50% of the population who are so underrepresented in terms of females driving, etc. And actually, for those people, I would say, who are stuck with debilitating childcare costs, do talk to your work coach. There is opportunities and ways that you can be progressing in work out there. And particularly, for example, in Mr. Stevens' constituency, we've got outreach in particular for over 50s, for people with a BAME background, and other areas where we're seeing very specific sectors with additional barriers, which can include childcare. And probably one of the best things about UC, as Mr. Cooling's advised, is it brings the whole of the family, the whole of the household into view, and we, as a result, through Plan for Jobs, are able to help people with that. So I would say again, have a look at the Job Help website, talk to your employer, talk to your work coach, and there are ways that we can support you. And as the Minister for Welfare Delivery said, it is 85% of childcare costs. We pay it back very quickly, we process it, and if it is about starting work and you have any upfront childcare costs, we can do that through Flexible Support Fund as well.
Thank you, and thank you for laying out the big beasts. I mean, obviously it comes as no surprise to me that housing is one of the ones, as I've already mentioned, in my constituency, affordability of housing, affordable rents is a huge problem. And in fact, the number one reason why people are at risk of homelessness is because of inaffordable rents locally. And I do think sometimes I wonder if we're focusing on the wrong thing in the telescope in terms of discussion about the UC temporary uplift as opposed to these core big problems that many people face in terms of their day-to-day cost of living, and particularly barriers in terms of getting into work or even being able to live in my constituency, full stop. But one thing that we've asked about previously in our previous investigations has been around indebtedness. And do you have any data in terms of how many people have debts which they're repaying which are more than the amount of the uplift, and how many people, what is the proportion of people on UC who are paying back more than £20 a week because of tax credit debt? Do you have any sort of sight of that sort of?
I don't have that data here, so, and Neil, unless you've got it, I can certainly write to you. So we will have data in relation to Mr. Corley some time to flip through his notes. We certainly have data in relation to any deductions that are being made to those on universal credit, and you'll know that we've made changes relatively recently reducing the maximum deductions. What we won't necessarily have, unless it will come from the Family Resource Survey, is a picture of debts that people may have outside of the universal credit system, so debts that we won't necessarily have any sight of.
So as of June 21, Mr. Spencer, 45% of claims had a deduction on them. I don't think I brought with me the levels of those deductions from memory. They're about £50 a month, I think, is the average deduction. So below the £20 a week, but significant for a household.
Roughly half of claimants are having deductions, of which is about £50 a month.
That will also include a repayment of advances.
Yeah, so actually with that clear, that includes advances. So one of the ways of thinking about when trying to understand the deduction policy is to look at the first 12 months of a claim, now the first 24 months of a claim, because of the impact of advances on that figure.
And we have made a significant change also to advances in that you now have 24 months in which to repay an advance instead of 12 months.
And the maximum cap, in terms of deductions, was lowered to 25%
from 40
of the personal allowance. So one of the impacts, perhaps a positive impact, from the removal of the £20 uplift will be that limit on deductions will fall again. So it's currently 25% of the uplifted amount, the personal allowance, and it will be 25% of the lower personal allowance relative to the temporary uplift.
The temporary uplift could be going to help offset the harm of the cost on people in terms of deductions. That's a bit of a
So how the deductions work is the cap. So for example, if you take a single person who would be repaying some debt, it's currently worked out as 25% of £411 a month. That's the maximum that they can repay, so call it £100. I'm just trying to do it quickly in my head. As the temporary uplift is removed, their entitlement would be £324 a month, and you would apply the 25% cap to that. So the amount they are repaying in deductions will fall as the temporary uplift is removed as well.
Let's just go through the numbers, because what would that then amount to?
Well, essentially, just very quick off the top of my head, you're seeing that their deductions will fall by £5. No, hang on, that's wrong. That's
why I think the numbers are useful, just to sort of make sense.
So the maximum deduction will be.
May I jump in while you're doing the calculations? Would that be helpful, Neil? I just wanted to address, Doctor, if I may, about the barriers the logistics and the indebtedness that you mentioned. I think that's incredibly important. Regarding the in-work progression report, which covers childcare and other issues, the 26 recommendations that we're working on. One thing that I think is really important to learn from the pandemic and for us at DWP to capitalise on through the plan for jobs and work that we're doing is to get to people before they get to that point. That people see Job Centre Plus, I call them jobs community progression, to come to us before they're in peril, to be able to help them as soon as possible. And that's why, and we didn't quite get to touch on it earlier when Mr. Stevens was asking about engagement, but being able to see your work coach. We've been open all the way through for the most vulnerable, but we're now getting back to face-to-face meetings. Those work coaches having those interventions, learning what's going on under the surface is key. And if we can move to the point that people are not in peril when they come to us, or they're coming to us because we're looking to progress, all the boot camps for which DFE have which all the people are going on, are all going through work coaches, and that is a massive step forward, so that we're helping people before they get into the situation you described.
Yeah, sure, and that's at least in terms of disabled people. One of the questions that I was why I was so impressed by some of the evidence and strategy in terms of Minister Tomlinson gave yesterday around advocacy, and it's, in terms of a previous report that we did in terms of the advances of what, to be honest, I'd like them to be called loans, but we can have that argument again or later if you want. It is around the advice that's been given to people so they don't fall into debt and indebtedness. Because my question is, I guess, becomes a more fundamental one, which is how much of the £20 uplift essentially went to pay the government back advances and tax credits? Again, what are the systemic issues here which people are facing that we can do something about? And you'll know that we've also, again, been raising a lot of questions in terms of the handing over of tax credit debt, and struggled, and are struggling to try and pin down who we actually need to question about that in terms of that policy decision. But Neil, you...
It's to say, Mr. Spencer, that Mary's Church of England School in Ware can be complimented on the quality of their teaching of my mental arithmetic. If I get in a plug from my old school, it is £5 a week. So as the uplift is removed, if you're on maximum deductions at the single over 25 rate, you will see those deductions fall by £5. So the net effect of the removal of the temporary uplift on that person will be £15, not 20. Just the way in which the cap works.
Okay. Fine. It might be helpful then if you
want me to set that out?
Yeah, could you put that in writing? Could you put that in writing so we're not sort of looking at each other slightly, challenging each other on our sort of mental math skills? But I think I've made my point, and you've answered, and look forward to hearing from you in terms of how that lays out.